Great group today. Thanks for joining us for this live event on how to put research into action to communicate more effectively about prevention. As I said, my name is Sally Lasky. The National Sexual Violence Resource Center provides leadership in preventing and responding to sexual violence through collaboration, through promoting research, and responding to sexual violence by creating and sharing resources with folks around the country. We were founded by the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Rape, and we provide professional support to networks throughout the country and throughout the world. We are very excited for this live event today and happy that you all can join us. We hope that there's an opportunity for there to be lots of discussion. And I want to introduce our two presenters today. Pamela Mejia is the head of research at Berkeley Media Studies Group, where she leads qualitative and quantitative analysis of how the media portrays public health and social justice issues. And she also looks at the implications of those portrayals in communicating strategically, which is exactly what we're going to be focusing on today. Many of our projects focus on identifying messages that build support for sexual violence prevention policies and analyzing how issues like gun violence, criminal justice reform, and child abuse appear in news coverage. Pamela's research has informed communication strategies for the California Partnership to End Domestic Violence and the San Francisco Municipal Transportation Authority, among others. She has been published in the American Journal of Public Health and the Journal of Child Sexual Abuse. She holds a bachelor's degree in human nutrition from Washington State University, as well as a master's degree in biochemistry and public health from the University of California at Berkeley. Also happy to have the NSVRC Communications Director, Laura Palumbo, here with us today. Laura works on strategic messaging, media engagement, and educational materials to promote that prevention is possible. For 8 years, she has led NSVRC in developing materials for advocates, parents, youth, and college students. She is currently working on her master's in communications at Penn State University. Before we jump into our discussion, our presenters, and I'm sure all of you would like to learn a little bit more about each other. So we do have a quick poll that we would like to do specific to your experience with messaging. So on your screen here, you will see a quick poll.
Okay.
Sorry, it will come up in a second. Would you mind just reading what our question is, Laura? And then I will get this displayed on our screen here. There we go.
Hi, everybody. Yes, here's our poll. So we know many of you are working in different contexts with different audiences, and it's really helpful for us to hear from you. Who are the main people that you're communicating with about prevention? So some of the options, and this is not a totally comprehensive list, so please, if you have other additions, you can let us know through the Q&A, but media, funders, community members, students, academics or researchers, colleagues, and policymakers. And thus far, it looks like we have a little bit of a spread across all of these audiences, but a high concentration of folks that are just looking to have some tools to communicate more effectively with their colleagues, and a really significant amount of folks that are community members and students. Those are their target audiences. So thank you all for sharing that with us. It's very helpful for us as we share this information with you today to kind of keep those audiences in mind, but also knowing that you all are keeping those audiences in mind as you hear from us. So thank you, Sally, also for the warm introduction.
Sure, and I know that you have some questions that you wanted to pose and chat about with Pamela. I do want to remind folks that at any time during the discussion, they can post a question to the Q&A, and we'll be responding to some via that chat function, and then some of them will be opening up and asking for for Laura and Pam to respond to as well. So I'll turn it over to you, Laura.
Yeah, so I'll start with some of the questions we have prepared, but I'll first let everyone know in the web link section, we're referencing a few new NSVRC and BMSG materials that we've developed through our partnership, and I have a little visual aid, so let me see. There we go. So this is the one which is moving toward prevention, which is our new guide that we developed with BMSG, and there's a link to that in the web link section. And then in this guide is going to be a lot of where we draw today's materials from, and the research of the Berkeley Media Studies group really informed all of the content in the guide, and it provides a really, really comprehensive overview of how sexual violence is framed and some of how that specifically plays out in the media, which we know is an important consideration for those of us who are working directly with media, but anyone who's communicating with audiences that are getting most of their information about this topic from the media, and then ways to effectively message. So that is the tool that we are referencing. Sorry, not doing a great job of fitting it in the screen. The YouTube bloggers make it look so easy. And then we do have a set of materials that are specific for working directly with media, that are sort of meant to be really quick how-to resources for different aspects of media relations and media advocacy. So that is in this toolkit, and all of that is up on our website, and you have the shortcut links in that little web link box. You know, Pamela, based on all of the work that Berkeley Media Studies Group has done in your long history of looking at how public health issues are understood and framed, as well as in terms of this project, what does the research tell us about effective messages?
Thank you, Laura, and thank you, Sally. Thank you, everyone, for having me. That is a great question, and before I jump in, I just want to say a tiny little bit about who BMSG, well, what BMSG, I guess, is and what we do, and then a little bit about the research that informed this process, because it was a 5-year process, and there's a lot of different pieces of it that helped us glean some of the answers to the question. So Berkeley Media Studies Group, for those of you unfamiliar with our work, is a very small, about 10% of the staff right here, public health nonprofit that's based in Berkeley, California. And our work is really threefold. So I'm head of research, as you heard, and our research focuses on looking at media and news narratives about different public health and social justice issues, really with an eye towards understanding both gaps in the narrative and strengths that people want to build up. We use that research to inform training and strategic communication and consultation for community groups, advocates, researchers, anybody who wants to get better at either using the media or just communicating strategically about the issues that they want to see changed and the policies and structural changes that they want to see enacted. I saw from the list many folks here aren't necessarily interacting with the media every day, which, you know, totally understood, neither am I, but we're all communicating every day with lots of different people, and one of our big tasks here at BMSG is figuring out how to help people do that in the most effective way possible to manage to affect the change that we want to see in the world. And finally, we provide professional education for journalists to equip them with the tools and the resources to ask questions and write stories that leave room for a broader public health and social justice perspective. We've worked with people from just a lot of different different disciplines and areas, and about 6 years ago, Karen Baker, then of NSVRC, now of PCAR, approached us with a question that was really around how to frame sexual violence, sexual harassment, abuse, and assault from across the lifespan so that prevention is part of the story, so that it's not seen as an inevitable problem, but one that we can all have a stake in ending before it happens. We said, sure, we'll try. And that's when 5 years of work began. And that included a news analysis. Those of you, some of you may have seen issue 22, What's Missing from the News About Sexual Violence. That's also available on bmsg.org, and I'm happy to share that link. We did many years of structured listening sessions and interviews with folks from around the country and around the field to understand sort of what it is that how people are communicating about prevention, what the challenges they see are, what questions they still have that they want answered, and what the frustrations and tension points are. And then it was really exciting. We got to do quite a bit of public opinion and message testing research, where we actually scientifically and strategically looked at what stories and storytellers, what values, what scenarios help move people towards seeing prevention not only as something that's possible, but something that they have a stake in, something that they want to engage with, something that they want to do and be part of wherever and whoever they are. We synthesized all of that work into the document that Laura referenced, as well as some additional materials that are available online. We also have hard copies available soon, so let me know if you'd like a copy of that. And I would say that the big takeaways that we found to speak directly to what we learned was that an effective message about prevention, and I think that there's a slide that might just help distill this down so folks can see it. Well, that's my, there we go. So an effective message about prevention starts by leading with shared values. It evokes those shared values of whatever you and your audience find most important and valuable about the work that you do or the work you want to do together. So whether that's protection, safety, nurturing the next generation, whatever it may be. The second piece of an effective message is that it acknowledges discomfort and negative or divided feelings, because we know that everybody that's hearing about or talking about sexual violence with us, nobody is coming as a blank slate. People have experience with this. It's often very negative and frightened experience, and they feel a lot of bad things about it. And if our messaging doesn't acknowledge those bad feelings, maybe it doesn't have to go super into depth, but at least acknowledge that those bad feelings and divided feelings are there, our audience is maybe more likely to shut down or not see us as credible messengers and see what we have to say as something that they want to listen to. So first we have to evoke those shared values. We need to acknowledge that this is a tough subject, this is something yucky, that people have bad feelings about it. Then we need to, or as part of that work, we also need to, if you can hit the little thing, thank you. We need to frame our message and describe our message in the context of a journey towards understanding and action that includes both the starting point of the journey and the pivotal moment that helps people see prevention as possible. What does that look like? Well, that can look like a lot of different things, but essentially what we discovered is people have so many bad feelings and so many anxieties about sexual violence, so much resistance to the idea of sexual violence as something that can be prevented or stopped, that their inclination is to close down and to not listen to what we have to say. But what we found is that metaphors and language that evoke a journey that helps people kind of have a path out of those negative feelings and towards some kind of action, towards some kind of hope and aspiration, towards some shared action, and towards taking steps towards doing prevention from where they are together. And a journey doesn't have to be a long journey, although sometimes that's really helpful if you're dealing with a skeptical group. But it can even just be language like, I learned, or what I found out was that blank, and that helped me blank. So things that really show that progression from maybe apathy, from confusion, towards fear and disgust, towards something else. An effective message about prevention also needs to state the problem, and state the problem precisely. The way that we state the problem really affects how people see the solution. And you notice that problem is not the top, right? It's not the first thing that needs to come up in a message, because it's very easy to talk about the problem, and people are aware oftentimes of the problem, far more so than they even want to be. And so it's important that we state the problem, but that we state the problem in a way that helps point towards the solution we want to see, and that is pretty concise, that it isn't trying to overwhelm people with the full scope, even though we know what a vast and deep problem this is. Finally, an effective message about prevention names a concrete solution, and most importantly, illustrates success. And success can look like a lot of different things. Success can be small. Success can be two organizations finding a better way to work together. Success can be a small group of students finding out or discovering that a training was actually really important and meaningful for them despite earlier resistance. success can be, again, it might not be dramatic, and it doesn't have to be. Oh, my screen just froze up there, but so I hope you guys can still see me. And can you all see me?
We can.
Okay. Okay. And finally, a message, a successful message about prevention follows what we call the rules of the road. So what that means in practice is speaking plainly, avoiding jargon, and it often means talking about conduct, not character, when we're talking about people who commit sexual abuse and assault and harassment. So what we know is that when we talk about use phrases like offenders, perpetrators, monsters, perverts, things like that, that can really close people down to the idea of prevention as possible, because they see that as then saying that these are unchangeable people whose behavior can never be modified, and in that case, how could it ever be possible to do anything about stopping sexual violence before it happens? But if we can figure out ways to tell stories about early intervention, about changing behaviors, or ways to even just use language like people who commit abuse or assault, people who harm others, that can be very, very powerful in helping people see that sexual harassment, abuse, and assault are issues of conduct, not character, that is a spectrum of behaviors. If it's a spectrum of behaviors, it's possible to intervene and stop some of them before they happen or before they progress. So that is a very long way of answering your question, but I wanted to make sure to give a little bit of context for what it is that we found.
Yes. And so another thing that the BMSG's research has spoken a lot to is that people, when we're talking to them, when we're communicating with any audience about prevention, they're not necessarily working from a blank slate. So they're coming to the table with with a range of information and understanding on this issue that's been fed into from a variety of sources, whether it be from the media, from their own personal experience, or that there tends to be some understandings that are already in place for the people that we're communicating with. So, how do these messaging approaches that you were just talking about help us address some of the ideas about sexual violence and prevention that people are already holding that might not always be helping us get toward understanding and might be some of may at times be challenges?
That's a great question, and I would say that probably I don't think there's anybody on this call who's unfamiliar with the range of ways that people frame or understand sexual harassment, abuse, and assault. And what our research really, some of what our research was doing was just kind of distilling down and understanding what those frames are before we could figure out what some of the components of a good message or communication are that can help shift those frames or even help people move through them towards seeing them as not necessarily the be-all, end-all of their understanding of sexual violence. And so it won't surprise a lot of folks on this call to hear that by and large people view sexual violence as a series of isolated and terrible but kind of inevitable instances. They tend to jump right to, when people talk about sexual violence, people tend to jump right away to the most forcible and violent acts. And they also tend to view sexual violence with a certain amount of fatalism. It's just something that happens and has to be dealt with. We know that people tend to view sexual violence in a related way as just too big to solve. Part of that fatalism is just the idea, well, this is just something that is huge and vast, and what can I possibly do about it? And really no one can do anything about it. So that's another one of those frames that people carry. A lot of people feel very disconnected from prevention. They may have had bad experiences with it before, so they might see it as just something, their work or a school does after the fact to deal with a problem, or they might feel like some of the language associated with prevention, like rape culture or toxic masculinity, means that they have to have a certain worldview to be part of doing prevention, maybe a worldview they don't ascribe to. People think that people who commit sexual violence are inherently monsters who can't be changed, and they must be somehow different or distinct from normal people because no one normal would do that. And finally, they aren't really sure that that there's any role or responsibility for institutions, that places like schools, like governments, like universities or businesses or places of worship have any role or any role that they can play in doing anything to prevent sexual violence, because again, it's seen as just the function of some bad people doing some bad, terrible, isolated, inevitable thing. The good news is that the other piece of, or kind of the other frame that we really uncovered is that people do also really view sexual violence as something that they want to play a role in ending because of their deep desire to protect and nurture children, young people, vulnerable people, their loved ones, their friends and colleagues. And that desire to protect and nurture and support and sustain and be part of the solution is really the centerpiece of that first element that I spoke about, the need to evoke shared values. When we remind people of those shared feelings that we have around protection, around nurturing, around safety, around the right of us all to thrive and be well in our communities and the spaces we live and raise our kids and work and worship, we can really, that evoking those shared values really helps us get much faster to a place of commonality and a place of working together, and a place of people being open to listening to what we have to say. I think the second piece of the message that we talked about a little bit earlier, if you could put the slide back up with all the 6 things up, that would be really helpful. When we talk about acknowledging negative feelings, lingering doubts, discomfort, that helps us acknowledge that discomfort and the horror, the fear that people feel when they think about this topic. Again, if we are not acknowledging that and not really validating what that people do have complex and scary experiences with this, they're less likely to listen to what we have to say, and they're more likely to kind of close down to our messages. The concise statement of the problem is similarly, the describing a journey rather, is really important too, because that helps us both deal with that anxiety and the fear, but it also helps us deal with some of that sense of fatalism, that sense of inevitability and too big that I talked about. When people can see others that they may identify with, who may have also felt that fatalism or that complacency, for lack of a better word, but they can also see their journey out of it, and they can see the movement towards action. They become more hopeful, and they also begin to see themselves on that journey. And it helps move them out of that sense of complacency or hopelessness that this is something that is just too big to deal with. When we name the problem concisely, we're again helping people deal with some of their fears, and we're also again helping open the door out of that fatalism and towards seeing a solution. And when we're talking about solutions and illustrating successes, that's helping people see what prevention can look like. Because, as I said, people don't really have a very good concept of what prevention can look like, and certainly not what it can look like in the context of what institutions and organizations and communities can do. So when we're concrete, and also when we show success, no matter how big or small that success, that's really, really critical for helping reframe that lack of clarity, that disconnection, that sense of hopelessness and helplessness. Speaking plainly, following that rule of the road also helps us get around some of that disconnect prevention. When we can show people that even if they're not comfortable with phrases like toxic masculinity or rape culture, that they can still be part of prevention. That's a really critical, and that was a big turning point for a lot of people in the research that we did. And finally, some of the conduct, not character work that I spoke about in the rules of the road, that also can help us illustrate to people that prevention isn't just the purview of monsters in the bushes, bad apples who can't be changed, that in fact it's about people, sometimes people that we know and love and trust, sometimes people that we truly care about or valued. And that if it's about people that we care about, we all have a stake and we all have an opportunity to be part of doing prevention, whoever and wherever we are. So that's just a little bit of a breakdown of some of the frames that came up in the messaging that we saw, in the research that we did, and also the ways that these pieces of a message and these components and recommendations can help us both address but also help people work through those frames and get towards something where prevention is seen as not murky, not impossible, not too big to fail, but as something attainable and achievable, as something that people want to and can be part of.
And I just want to let folks that are in the audience know that we actually, in the guide, the first chapter does go sort of frame by frame discussing some of those default frames that people in the general public, or pretty much anyone who doesn't work in our field, already identifies an ally to this issue, some of the default frames that they're operating with, in addition to not only providing the tips and strategies around each of the effective messaging practices that Pamela has mentioned, but also some tables on sort of evoking values, different examples around that. So this is something that everything that Pamela has discussed so far is really we go deeper with it in the guide. And before we have our next discussion question, a great question came in through the chat from a preventionist that's listening. So they are asking, and this is going back to the idea of focusing on conduct, not character. Is there any way you can make that question a little bigger for me, Sally? Okay. So. All right, so there we go. That was not Sally, that was me, and in technology. So are there ways to explain why by focusing on conduct, not character, to folks who are passionate about accountability for individuals who choose to harm others, the default frame is probably what they're operating with in terms of these people being bad apples and being beyond redemption, in that it may be a legitimate frustration with gaps that are informal processes and social norms, since we know that so few people are held accountable for having committed sexual violence, that it can be really, I think we found this a lot. We processed a lot of these feelings as we were doing the research as well, is that it can seem by the idea of focusing on conduct, not character, that we're maybe excusing someone's behavior, and that's not the intended goal. Do you mind talking about that a little bit more, Pamela?
Absolutely. That's a great question, and I want to thank you for raising it. And I noticed you use the phrase, the default frame, which I love as a communications researcher, some would say nerd. So thinking about the default frame, just as a little bit of background, a lot of times, especially in U.S. society, when we're talking about framing, when we're talking about the way that people understand the world, we're thinking about individual and personal responsibility. So we're thinking of good things that happen as a result of good choices and bad things that happen as a result of bad choices or bad people, something intrinsically wrong. And of course, personal responsibility, personal accountability is incredibly important. I don't want to say that it is not, but I do want to say that, we know, especially as people who work in these spaces, that it's not the only thing, right? There's a bigger, broader world out there that should also really, if we're taking a holistic view, not just of stopping individual cases, but really preventing sexual harassment, abuse, and assault overall, that we need to take into account. So that default frame is that frame of personal responsibility, good people versus bad people, good choices versus bad choices, and the solution is always just make a better choice. And the frame that maybe is less the default, but maybe more the one that is supportive of prevention, it also takes into account the world, the institutions, the spaces around us that shape and reflect our behaviors, and can have a huge influence, and also perhaps need to have a role in what we do to solve the problem. Well, all that to say, I think that this is a question that we've grappled with a lot, and one of the first things I want to say, and I didn't really go into it here for time limitations, and perhaps that's something I should have talked about, is we think about all communication really, the message is never first, right? It's always going to be nested into a larger overall strategy, and our larger overall strategy is going to be shaped by is going to be about the change we want to see, the change we want to make. And within that, we're going to need to be thinking, of course, about who our messengers are, who our audience is, and all of these different pieces are going to be moving based on the cultural context, based on where we are as a country, as a community, as whatever else. So I say all that to say that it's when we talk about conduct, not character, we need to think of that in the overall context of our overall strategy. And as we even mentioned, I think in the tool guide that Laura referred to several times, that's something that we really do go through when we grapple with, because we know that there will be contexts and spaces where, in fact, we came across these contexts and spaces in the research itself where it was inappropriate to, or where people told us that they felt it was inappropriate or upsetting or off-putting to the messaging, to hear phrases like people who commit harm, or to hear stories about early intervention or efforts to change behavior. And so I think that that's always going to be a question of what your overall strategy is and your overall sense of what you want to accomplish and what you need to accomplish in this communication environment to achieve that overall strategy. And so it may be that you decide, based on your own knowledge, based on the audience that you're in and the messengers you're working with, that that is not the right call for that communication environment, and that is okay too. In an overall sense, what we have just found is that by and large, across the, in lots of different spaces, using phrases like people who commit abuse and assault, or telling stories about early intervention, or that help to bring the focus onto conduct rather than character, are really helpful in opening a lot of people's doors and minds to the possibility of prevention. That's not always going to be the case, and that'll be the judgment call really based on your overall strategy and your understanding of the audience you're working with, the comfort level of your messengers, and ultimately the change that you want to achieve in the short or the long term. And Laura, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything else to that. I know that that's something that we've really grappled with a lot in the course of this work, and I definitely want to make sure that there's space to talk about that.
So I'm very glad that Pamela sort of mentioned that that might not be the strongest strategy to read with each audience and with every partner. But I also think that we do, when we're talking about the why behind these practices, it's important for people to know that some of those same assumptions so there's as much misinformation as there is about sexual violence. There's misinformation about people who sexually offend, and I think that's part of our culture's larger accountability problem, is that people think that they can tell who a person is that would potentially cause harm, and that they can tell who a safe person is, and that a lot of when we talk about conduct, not character, is really not only helping us to challenge that that default frame that's looking at the individual, but also pull in some of the broader need for accountability.
And that'll, again, just be a judgment call based on your strategy and the communication space you find yourself in. And hopefully there will be, we hope that there will increasingly be, or there will be spaces where these this kind of language and focusing on conduct, not character, is the appropriate space. But again, completely recognize and want to be respectful of the fact that it won't always be. And that's something that'll be important to keep in mind, and that in those contexts it also may be valuable to, in that case, think about other aspects of the message that you really want to highlight more too, to help people move towards prevention, even if the idea of accountability for individuals who commit harm feels like kind of a stumbling block at the outset. Great question, love it.
All right, and so for our next discussion question, we can actually it's a great segue from this idea of challenging some of the way we talk about people who sexually offend, is that can be something that really triggers debate or triggers some tough questions, and that people are sometimes in a position where they can when they're just sharing information, but oftentimes we're responding to questions and questions that are pretty difficult and polarizing. So how do we answer some of those tough questions?
That is a great question and a great segue. And we, in fact, do have in both the resource guide and the toolkit a lot of resources in thinking about that, because we understand that, of course, as Laura said, this is going to be there's often pushback, there's often highly fraught emotions in dealing with and thinking about this topic and trying to change the way that people think and talk about it. And a couple of things that I'll just highlight. I know we're getting a little bit close to time, and I want to be respectful of that. One of the key things we found in the course of the messaging research, and I'm sure this is not news to folks in this room or this virtual room, is that people bring with them a lot of ideas and beliefs about sexual harassment, abuse, and assault, some of which are inaccurate or really kind of put some stumbling blocks to having the conversations that we want to be having to talk about prevention and to make prevention tangible and make prevention actionable. And one of the things that we really found is that it's really important when we're faced with those conversations where it feels like there's maybe inaccurate information coming up or there's misapprehensions, that tit for tat debate, that the immediate instinct to correct that information and move back to what's correct can sometimes not help us. Sometimes it can hurt us. It can actually shut things down a little bit. It can shut things down. And what we found is it's really important to address and speak to the underlying emotions underneath those questions. So the fear, the anxiety, the sense of hopelessness, the emotions that are often rooted in those frames we talked about. And when we can address those emotions first and kind of calm them and help, acknowledge that they're real and also sort of show a pathway out of them, and then move on to correcting the information and getting back to our point, that's really most effective in helping keep the conversation moving in a direction that supports prevention. So for an example, I often use this one. It came from a colleague that we interviewed as part of the research process. She was observing a panel discussion, and one of the panelists, they were talking about registries for people accused of or convicted of causing sexual harm. And one of the panelists came forward and said, well, I've heard that there's really high recidivism among people who do this, and that, for every pedophile, there's 100 victims. And the other panelist said, oh, no, that's not true, and immediately began mentioning, the recidivism rate has been shown to be between 5 and 8%, and started, pulling out p-values and statistics. I'm a researcher. I love those things too. And our colleague who we had interviewed, in reflecting back on watching this panel discussion, said, what I think might have happened was that panelist A, the one who kind of raised this concern about 100 victims, was really coming from a place of fear. And it might have been more effective for panelist B, instead of jumping right into the p-values and the statistics, to say, it's really scary, something along the lines of, it's really scary to think about anybody in a community who would harm children. And I think, I want to acknowledge that, and I want to hear that. But I also want to make sure that we don't let inaccurate information enhance that fear, because it's important to also remember, and so then perhaps maybe move more into our statistics and p-values, although generally speaking, I don't recommend pulling out the p-values too early. People tend to glaze over a little bit. So I would say that's kind of an example of responding to that emotion first, and just letting people, it kind of fits in with that second piece of the message that we talked about, that acknowledging those negative feelings and acknowledging the fact that people that we're talking to don't lack for information about sexual violence. Sometimes it's the wrong information. What they may lack for is a sense of hope, a sense of knowledge of what prevention can be, and an idea of what it can look like in their own spaces and spheres of influence. And so if we can help them kind of assuage those fears and address some of those misconceptions that they've got before, that will help us address some of those misconceptions and leave the doorway and the pathway open to a conversation about prevention that's really grounded not only in fact, but in action. So that was, again, a very long answer to a very succinct question, Laura.
Well, I appreciate you weighing in, and so not surprisingly, we're very close to the end of our time together. We have
Well, in
very
that case, then let me just do a little push for in the message guide itself. We do include an activity at the back that includes not only some tough questions and some ways to think about answering them, but also is a little bit of an activity that can help you brainstorm those before, say, an interview or a meeting, so that you know, if it's helpful to have a little bit of time and space to write out or practice delivering messages to respond to those, we give you a little bit of a template for that, as well as some examples of what it can look like in practice. Thank you, Laura, for showing that. And that's going to be in Moving Towards Prevention, the guide that is available in the little resources window.
So Pamela and I are going to wrap up by sharing some other resources that are available to support strong and effective communication about sexual violence prevention. But I do encourage folks, if you still have a question that you haven't had a chance to answer, please ask your questions through the Q&A chat. If we don't have a chance to get to it, we can potentially add it to a blog or follow up with you directly. We certainly want to hear your questions, even if we don't have time to get to them today. So in terms of some of the resources, Pamela, do you want to share other tools that are out there?
Absolutely. Well, on the BMSG website, as well as elsewhere, we have the references we've talked about today, which are Moving Towards Prevention and the Media Engagement Toolkit. We also have, and I see it in Laura's hand, so she can hold it up. We also have a link, and I'm happy to share, or perhaps somebody, well, we can send it out, called Where We're Going and Where We've Been, which is another piece that came from that same 5-year research process, making the case for preventing sexual violence. And that also goes through a little bit more of the message testing process of that that got us to those messaging recommendations, and also includes examples of how to put it into practice and how to nest it in an overall strategy, which we talked about a little bit over the course of this call. So again, this is something that the same basic guidelines around messaging, but it takes a little bit of a different tack, and it's more focused on application to different structural and systems changes in a wide variety of institutions, as well as a lot more information about strategy and planning. And for those of you who love to get into the methods, as I often do, an opportunity to learn more about what we did and what we found. So I would say those are my 3 top of line, and then also we shared the news analysis that we did. I love it. You look like you're doing like a little Vanna White. I love it.
There's a reason I work at NSVRC and not QVC. This is developed, Pamela mentioned, in partnership with the group Reliance, and
that's right.
It has some great, includes things like a table on language that we use in the field and what a plain language version looks like, which is definitely a fan favorite in this guide, and some other tools that really relate to both guides will give you a lot of insight for your messaging and communication efforts. They have some great overlap, but they definitely provide a lot of good information each on their own as well. So we do want to mention that for you. And then
oh, sorry. And I also wanted to flag, too, that I know this is a lot to take in. I'm sorry to interrupt, Laura. I know this is a lot to take in such a short period of time. And we're all at NSVRC and at BMSG and at Reliance as well. We're all very, very interested in continuing to find ways to make sure that this information can get out into the world and be put into practice. So if you do have interest in a training or a webinar, something of that nature, we'd really love you to reach out to Laura or myself. And just let us know, and we'll be happy to set up a follow-up call and have some conversations about how we can make this, do some more in-depth work with this in your community, in your organization, in the spaces that you're in, because it's a lot to take in, but it's really valuable, and we're really hoping that it can be a living document that gets out in the world and continues to inform the way folks are doing their work.
Well, thank you for the wonderful show and tell, and this is clearly not our only opportunity that we're going to have to keep sharing information from the great research that you all have been part of, and I just really appreciate your time today, and all of our participants as well.
Yeah, we're so thankful to have everyone along today. And again, you can continue to send through your questions either through the chat, or you can follow up at resources@nsvrc.org. If you reach out to BMSG or to NSVRC, we'll make sure that one of us responds to your questions. And if you have other thoughts that you want to share, we definitely want to hear from you. And the best way to stay most up to date with both of our organizations is to sign up for our mailing lists, and of course to keep up with the conversation on social media.
Great. Well, thank you for everyone.
Thank you all for being here, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Taylor. And we will follow up. There have been a few questions that have come in that we'll follow up offline with people about. Thank you very much. And please check in with us for events coming in the future. And there'll be a quick feedback survey for folks as well. Take care.